For those of you who followed Steve-O and his crew in the early 2000s while they were filming their stunts, many of you know and have seen the countless number of injuries Steve-O has sustained. Today, I want to medically break down Steve-O's 10 worst injuries. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sonam, and I'm a resident doctor specializing in sports and exercise medicine. On this channel, I break down injuries as they happen so that average fans can better understand what's going on. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date. For now, let's go look at some really scary injuries. So many of you know Steve-O was part of a franchise that pretty much all they did was they tried to beat the living crap out of their bodies. And, you know, I remember watching this as a young kid too, thinking, oh my God. And this wasn't even through a doctor's lens, but going back and watching some of his worst injuries as a physician really kind of sparks a different type of fire in me. So let's go through kind of these 10 worst injuries. All right. So number 10 in terms of Steve-O's worst injuries was jumping off of a roof into a hot tub. This is a terrible idea. I mean, as a doctor, I'm worried about a multitude of things. And of course, Steve-O comes out, is in a lot of pain, doesn't go to the hospital, and pretty much shows us the resulting picture of basically the area around his sacrum deformed. So you're definitely worried about kind of either a tailbone injury or sacrum injury. Now, looking at this is a terrible idea because there isn't enough water to dissipate the force. You know, things like heel fractures you could definitely sustain. And the other thing that Steve-O did end up having was either a tailbone or a sacrum injury. So if we look back at our anatomy specimen, the tailbone and the sacrum are this area of the pelvis. And essentially, it's actually the sacrum that we're most worried about, given the pictures that he had. Now, the sacrum actually creates part of this pelvic ring. So what happens is if you have damage to that sacrum, you can actually cause a disruption in the pelvic ring, which can cause overall a lot of bleeding, a lot of instability, and needs to be fixed surgically, or at least a period of immobilization. The other thing you have to be worried about is there are a ton of nerves that come out here. Those nerves are responsible for bowel and bladder function. So if you break that sacrum with that level of injury that we just saw, you have to be worried about them. Now, Steve-O, the crazy guy he is, did not seek any medical care and seemed to be okay. So I don't think he had any of these. The last thing I'd be worried about in a case like his is essentially a compression fracture, right? So you have your spine here. And when you have a huge kind of axial load, so you're falling and you have this huge kind of compression through the bottom here, you can definitely compress one of these vertebrae. Didn't have one there, but we're going to get to an injury where he did get one. So the 9th worst injury that Steve-O had sustained was essentially walking on a beam of fire and falling onto a hot bed of coal. I don't know why he thought this was going to be safe in the least amount, but like, you know, I know he got off quickly, but you're thinking 1st, 2nd, 3rd degree burns, mainly because they actually use sheet metal to protect the floor. So essentially this fire became molten lava right on top. So he's definitely, oh man. I did a stint at the burn center and seeing kind of burn victims and so forth really puts this into perspective, just because, you know, small things like this can cause disastrous consequences later on in life. The one thing I really wanted to bring out is he never took any painkillers for these, mainly because he was a recovering addict, so he didn't want to kind of relapse. And I mean, you know, for the most part, I wouldn't classify these as super severe burns, but they're definitely going to scar and leave some issues in terms of skin pliability. So I'm thinking kind of, you know, a 2nd degree burn is what he's going to sustain. He wasn't on the coals for too long, but it's definitely something he's not going to want to repeat. So the 8th worst injury, according to Steve-O, was essentially he got so hammered one night, he ended up presenting an award with a broken, disconnected toe. And this guy has the audacity to come up and present the award, kind of declaring he's broken his toe and he has no idea what to do. I mean, everyone's probably had nights in Vegas where they cannot remember what they're doing. But the fact that he's walking around with a toe that's kind of hanging off, I mean, you know, some other people have done it too. It's probably not one of the craziest things he did, but he's definitely going to need to get that fixed or amputated. So the 7th worst injury that Steve-O has sustained was essentially throwing himself with a trash can onto the ground. Somehow, I don't even know where they come up with things like this, but check this out. So it gets stuck here. He goes face front. So kudos to him to wearing kind of his helmet, his pads, and so forth. But he lands straight onto his collarbone, gets up, and finally thinks, okay, a few days later, I should probably go to the hospital. That's when they realize his collarbone was fully broken. So this isn't Steve-O's injury, but it's kind of something I wanted to show you when it comes to collarbone fracture. So the collarbone is that area of it's called the clavicle. And essentially the most common area that is fractured is the mid-shaft area. Now, most of these tend to be non-surgical if they're not completely displaced. What that means is if they're still a part connecting to some degree and they're in the vicinity, they tend to heal okay. They can have a bit of a deformity, but usually structurally they're intact. Now, really bad fractures tend to actually need an ORIF, or an open reduction internal fixation. So they put plates and screws in there. Now, in Steve-O's case, it didn't appear that he needed this because he actually said he didn't require surgery for this, but this is something that you would have if it was a really bad fracture, lots of skin tenting, or if the two pieces were really far apart. So the sixth worst injury that Steve-O appeared to have sustained was during a tubing accident. He was getting dragged across, and then apparently he hit something and had gashes at the front and the back of his lower legs. Now, apparently he needed to go into surgery to get this repaired, and as you can see here, he's got stitches in situ. But essentially, when you have a large gash that goes to the front and the back of your leg, you're worried about anything in between here that potentially can get damaged. Now, first off, tubing itself can be pretty dangerous. Many of you have probably been dragged on the back of a boat, and you know that you can get whiplash, really bad concussions. Some people come in, and I've actually seen kind of nerve injuries from being pulled so quickly that they get nerve injuries in their long thoracic nerve and so forth. So it's definitely something we see a lot of as doctors. So if you look at where Steve-O's injury was, essentially he had this huge gash here. Now, as you dissect out the lower leg and the layers of the lower leg, you're going to come into nerve, artery, and vein. So, having a gash that looks like this is not always ideal because you want to make sure that there's no injury to the neurovascular structures. Now, he did have surgery. They likely explored it, and he was okay. But this guy has got way more than 9 lives, to be honest. So, according to Steve-O, this was his 5th worst injury. And to be honest, this one scared me the most. So this guy thinks it's a good idea to have a fireball blown off of the top of his head, and please do not try this at home. His head catches on fire, and the trick is that he's going to do a backflip. He goes ahead and does a backflip while his head is on complete fire. Now, burn injuries to the face are no joke. They can cause lasting and lifelong deficits if it goes into the throat or even around the eyes. So this here scared the living crap out of me when I watched it as a doctor, and especially doing stints on the burn ward. So they actually had to go in and debride the area of the skin when he went into the emerge. And this is something we have to do in really bad burns. And usually when we're doing burns, we actually give people either like really, really, really potent opioids or fentanyl, because doing burn dressings and burn changing and actually just scraping off skin can be extremely painful. Now, Steve-O didn't take anything more than Advil or Tylenol, and he was a beast for not being able to do so, because the amount of pain that these dressing changes can cause is insurmountable. And that's why we actually give people, short-acting, quick-acting fentanyl so that we can do these dressing changes and also debride the area. And thinking about it, okay, they pretty much told Steve-O he's going to be like this for a few months and take months to heal, because this is like, second degree burns and deep second degree burns at best. So he had a debridement here, and like 2 weeks later, he reports that he looks like this. And it just, Steve-O may be a really quick healer. I would not suspect that everyone would heal this quickly, and it could be the reason why he's able to put himself through so much abuse through his body and be okay in the long term. So this is unheard of, I'd be expecting skin to actually be, if anyone has seen Roman Grosjean's hands, to be very taut and to have quite a lot of scarring. But he was able to walk away with minimal damage to his face. Now, the 4th worst injury that Steve-O sustained was he was thrown off the stairs in a bell cart and actually sustained vertebral fractures, which are definitely no joke. So as they were filming one of their videos, comes there, lands on his back, finally decides something is not right, and finally thinks, okay, maybe it's a good idea to get checked out. Now, he was actually told that he had vertebral fractures and was out of filming for months. Now, what is a vertebral fracture? Vertebral fractures are no joke. You definitely don't want them. And as a young person to get one, that means you put a lot of force through your spine. So your spine is consistent of multiple bones. And essentially each vertebra or each bone is called a vertebrae. So that's one, for example, here. Now, usually the way you get these compression fractures is you have this axial load. So think about you're jumping down or you fall onto your bum and you have this force vector that goes down and it actually will compress one of those vertebrae. Now, the other way to fracture it as well is really hitting them on the side. I mean, the way Steve-O fell, it could have been that too. Now, the issue with these is in between you have these intervertebral discs. So sometimes if you compress them and you have a compression fracture, you can also blow a disc. And that disc, if it comes out, can start damaging other structures. So you have things like nerves that come out. So people who have a blown disc, for example, tend to have pain down into the legs because the nerve is getting impacted. This tends to take you out for a while, and I'm pretty sure Steve-O got maybe 1 to 2 centimeters shorter with this vertebral fracture. So Steve-O's third worst injury was, him doing a stunt where he backflips off a balcony, but in doing so, because he was completely intoxicated, he forgot to actually do it properly and landed straight on his face, causing multiple fractures to his teeth, a fractured skull, and I believe also a fractured facial bone. So this is the type of thing he was going to do. But he said he was doing it at a party and he wanted to impress somebody. So he just jumped off the second floor and lands straight onto his face. I don't know. Don't ever consider doing this at home. Don't ever think it's cool to do this at home. But he was lucky not to walk away with even more injuries than he did. So he ended up with a broken wrist, probably from bracing himself, which is something really common. 7 broken teeth and a fractured skull. Now, the fractured skull is something that we're worried about because the problem is if you fracture your skull, depending on where it's fractured, you can cause a brain bleed. And a brain bleed is something that is extremely dangerous. I'll link up a few videos that I did on this kind of in the past as well. Luckily, it didn't seem like he had anything, but you can definitely tell he's quite swollen in the eyes here. His face looks like crap, and he landed on his face. And I was suspecting something a little bit worse than this. I don't know how he's walking away from these injuries. So the second worst injury that Steve-O sustained was he thought it was a smart idea to stand on top of a porta-potty and try to jump off of it onto the floor with a skateboard and land this trick while a car was hitting the porta-potty. So I want you to pay attention to this right ankle here. Because he's jumping from a height of approximately 10 feet, there's a lot of force going down and he shatters this ankle. And he has a bit of a roll in there. So we call that everting that ankle. It's kind of the opposite of the way most people sprain their ankles. And you can just tell there, he's in excruciating amounts of pain. So this one actually hiked him to the hospital, and essentially he needed 11 screws and multiple plates in his ankle to fix things. So this is the ankle in the emergency department. I mean, I don't know about you, but even if I wasn't a doctor, I'd look at that and say, okay, that probably needs surgery. So because he had that eversion injury, he's definitely got an acute fracture on this side, or the medial malleolus. Now, because the fibula and the tibia, which are the 2 bones in the lower leg, are connected, likely both of them have been impacted, and your ankle joint is located kind of right in the middle. So these are his x-rays that you see. So essentially, if you flip these over because they're on their side, that's your tibia. That's the outside of your ankle. So essentially, when he rolled his foot outwards, he broke a piece off that inner ankle bone, the medial malleolus, but he also then compressed the entire fibula. So that actually needed plates and screws. So this was the outer ankle bone, creating the outer ankle prominence that you have on your ankle. So it's quite a lot in terms of, and this is the lateral. So this is kind of taking it from the side. And you can just see this is the fibula, which is the outside ankle bone, and the amount of screws and plates that he had to have in that area. It was a pretty bad ankle injury. He's likely going to get arthritis in that ankle later on. So as a doctor, Steve-O's worst injury is the one that scared me the most. And it's the one that he tried to blow himself up in a room with fire and came out with an insane amount of burns. So as you can see here, he thought this was a great idea. Now, he actually ended up burning approximately 15% of his total body surface area, which is insane. So if you look here, he's got blistering. So you're thinking kind of, more severe 2nd degree type burns. He's got blistering around here too. Usually we end up leaving those. We don't actually debride them unless they pop on their own because they're technically sterile on the inside. And kind of overall, he ended up burning approximately 15% of his body. Now, why is that significant? So I want to show you. that the palm of my hand is actually 1% of my total body surface area. So he burned 15 of those. And one of the things that we learn as doctors is when to refer to a burn center to have things like skin grafts done and so forth. Essentially, you refer when someone has severe burns that are greater than 10% of their total body surface area. This guy burned 15% and actually needed a ton of skin grafts. So he likely went to a center where they had to deal with burn victims. And reports state that he actually needed skin grafts. So they had to take kind of grafts from either thigh or other parts of the skin that weren't impacted to go over the area. Now, the issue with that is skin grafts are never as strong as your previous grafts. So they don't tan the same. They rip easier and they're not as pliable. So if you burn things like your hands and you have grafts on your hand, you actually can't stretch out your hands as much and you have to think about constantly doing therapy for it. So I cannot believe that he had the audacity to try that, burn 15% of his body. And I'm hopeful that he's not going to want to burn himself anymore. Although given his track record, he probably will. Now, overall, looking at his 10 worst injuries, I have no idea how he's still walking around, I see people who get one of these injuries who's pretty much taken out for good. I think Steve-O's a bit of an anomaly. He heals pretty well, and he can take a ton of crap that happens to him. If you have any questions or comments about this video, leave them down below. If you like this video and want to stay up to date on more videos I do in the future, please like and subscribe to my channel. For now, that's all.